2 more minutes and we'll be starting. Okay. Shall we start? Yes, okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 12th webinar organized by Parrhesia Collective. For those who are not familiar with what the collective does, I would like to give a brief introduction. Parrhesia Collective is made up of a group of women from different countries in search of truth and creativity based on their interests in social sciences and the arts. Parrhesia Collective has been organizing webinars with esteemed scholars, writers, and artists on indigeneity, temporality, and gender. Alongside the webinar series, Parrhesia Collective actively uses social media accounts to have their word out in Western Armenian, Turkish, and English to reach out to a wider audience. Parrhesia Collective also translates quotes of prominent philosophers, social scientists, and artists into Western Armenian and shares them on social media to contribute to the intellectual and philosophical debates. As of last year, members of Parrhesia Collective also started to contribute to Agos newspaper bi-weekly in 3 languages, and also contribute to Radio Agos on the first Saturday of every month. Every month, Parrhesia Collective also organizes Kavar literature from the provinces readings. You can follow Parrhesia Collective through the social media accounts and its website. We have recently started to send newsletters of Parrhesia Collective to those who are in our communication loop. If you want to receive the newsletter, please write to us at parrhesiacollective@gmail.com. Our next webinar series will be with Mark Nishanyan. It will take place in Armenian and it will be held in 4 sessions. The announcements will be shared on our social media accounts very soon. We would like to thank Kalus Gulbenkian Foundation for their invaluable support to maintain this project. I would also like to thank Tamar Gürciyan and Dença Değirmenci for their technical support at broadcasting this webinar. Today, we are here together with Cecil Artuç and Aras Kocayan. They'll be here for the discussion. Thank you for coming. And of course, I would like to introduce our dear friend, colleague, and member of the collective, Talin Suciyan, and we'll be talking about her recent book soon. It's great to be with you again, Talin. This time in this context, as a guest, not as a host. Welcome.
Thank you. It feels very strange, but I'm very happy.
Usually you do the introductions, but this time I'm in this position. But for those listeners who have not read about you before or have not been following your work before, I would like to give a brief description, brief background information about you. Talin Suciyan is Associate Professor, Privatdozentin in German, of Turkish Studies at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. Outcasting Armenians, Tanzimat of the Provinces is her recently published 2nd book, which was her habilitation thesis accepted by her home university, Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich in 2019. She received her doctoral degree in 2015 with her book, The Armenians in Modern Turkey, Post-Genocide Society, History and Politics, which was published by IB Tauris, which has been translated into Turkish by Aras Publication in 2018 and into German by De Gruyter in 2021 and soon will be released in Russian too. That's wonderful news. Her research focuses on Ottoman intercommunal relations, unevenness, non-contemporaneities, I can still not pronounce this word, gender, peasantry, Armenian literature of the Ottoman provinces, and medical practices of the 19th and 20th century Middle East. Talin is also one of the founders of Parrhesia Collective. Her work, her dedication to the field, and diligence keeps inspiring us all in the collective. Now we will start our discussion, and by the end of the talk, we will have a question and answer session. Until then, we would like to ask for your patience. Let me pose the first question to you, Talin. Again, welcome. And we are very proud with your new publication. We've been learning a lot from this book too in the collective. And I would like to ask you with the I would like to start with the following question about your transition actually from your first book to this book. As I shared when I was introducing you, your first book that was published in 2009, your first book, which was called The Armenians in Modern Turkey, Post-Genocide Society, History and Politics. And this book was concentrating on the 20th century. Why and how did you start working on 19th century? And why did you dive into a story that starts almost 100 years before your first subject? We also would like to hear more about your process of writing the book, as well as the publication process, which we believe also deserves to be discussed. The floor is yours, Talin.
Thank you so much. First of all, I mean, this book, the publication process of this book was also a process in which we started our collective. So there's a lot in this book that we have been discussing through our way in Parrhesia Collective. And therefore, I'm also very thankful to you all, for those who are here and who are in the audience. The road that we have passed during this all 3 years, our ideas evolved together, because scholarship, the way we are doing it today, is kind of a very lonely business, and basically you can't evolve without discussion. And this group of women was so empowering for me, because we had all the possibilities to come together to discuss during all those years of Corona, basically, where no one could come together. We were able to meet on Zoom and discuss, and that was really a very important part of this book as well. Those discussions that we've done. And why did I choose this topic? I mean, it was partly a technical, bureaucratical reason. In Germany, if you want to continue your scholarly work in the form of habilitation, then you have to choose a topic and a period of time which is completely different than the doctoral thesis. So if you are working on 20th century during your doctoral thesis, then you should be choosing another century and another topic for the second book. So it's not like it's, in US, this isn't necessarily the case, but in Germany it was. So as soon as I finished in 2013, which was, the book wasn't published yet, but I had to start I had to start a new research. At that point, I was still working on the first book's publication process, which was to be in 2 years. So there were 2 years in between where I was working for the publication of the book, and at the same time, I was looking for another subject on which to write on the second book. And one of these research trips to Nubarian Library basically for the first book, for the publication of the first book, and I ended up realizing that there was the 19th century Patriarchate archive of the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul there, and it was a series of coincidences that I saw those files, asked Boris Ajemian about these files, and he told me that is the 19th century archive of the Patriarchate of Istanbul. And that was a turning point in my research, because then I stopped doing the research that I was doing and I started to look into those documents. And it's such an important place Nubarian Library in Paris, because that is the place where scholars come together. At that time when I was there, Sebo Haslanyan was next to me, and we were doing our researches, and I was trying to read these documents, and he told me, don't read them, just photograph them, you'll need them at home. So I was shocked by those documents. And I did what he said, and it turned out to be very fruitful indeed. It's very important to have these kind of places for researchers, where researchers meet each other, as well as find new archival material for their research. So that was in 2014 when I first saw these documents and photographed and digitized for myself. But then there were 2 more years in which I was afraid of this material. I was afraid not to be good enough, and I was afraid that some other stories of violence would come out, and I was afraid because in Europe, almost nowhere in Europe, you're not trained to read Armenian manuscripts. So there were reasons for me to be afraid, but at a certain point, I said to myself, you can't postpone this anymore. And after 2 years, I started reading, and it was actually then easy. One of the most important support I found was from Dimitri Theodoridis, a Turkologist who was in his mid-70s, and Greek from Istanbul, who has been living in Munich, and we got to know each other ever since I work in Munich. Every week he used to come to the institute, and we sit and discussed one document, and that was the only scholarly interaction I had for years. And the second scholarly interaction was with my family, because at the moment where I was really stuck and wouldn't know whom to ask, I used to ask my father and my mother, and they very naturally knew what could it be. That was also a moment I realized, there is an autobiographical knowledge that is somehow not, we don't have it, but a generation above us, they know. So those were my scholarly contacts, and those discussions with Mr. Theodoridis were really unique, because he knew how to contextualize, and he would tell me what to read as a secondary source. And that was really the time where I read and wrote and discussed, and until 2019. And after that, that was when the habilitation was accepted. And after that, they did new process with the Corona years, the publication of the book. And during that period of time, I met Heri Harutyunyan, and that was also as a result of his 2019 published book on Armenian genocide, and the memoir he wrote on his family. And with him, we started to discuss and talk on temporality. And his work was really very mind-opening. And he read the thesis, and I read his work, and then we used to discuss almost once in a week or once in 2 weeks. And I started to think to apply temporality along with territoriality to this material. And at the end, I think it was really very enriching to think along those lines. So I'm also very, very thankful for the precious time Heri Harutyunyan devoted teaching me, basically, these concepts, from which also we as a group of, as a collective, benefited a lot, because we continued our discussions on these, and what does it mean to have a different temporality, or what does it mean to temporally govern a group, or how does that work? So those were the discussions that we had in our collective. So that was the second part, second 4 or 5 years. In total, it took 9 years. Yes, the publication of the book. So I think I responded, right? Okay.
Certainly, thank you.
Hi, I have some questions, Talin. Like you introduced the Nubarian archive. Can you explain a little bit, like, can you give a bit like information about what kind of documents you work with? Actually, maybe it's more appropriate here to ask you about the other texts that you make use of. You don't use only petitions, for example. You also refer to the works of authors like Barsumyan, Alboyajian, etc. Can you introduce these names? And another question, which is sort of a follow-up question. Where do you position this book in Ottoman history or Armenian studies? I mean, how does this book, and also like making research based on all of these primary texts and also the other books, how does it contribute to the literature?
Okay. So definitely there were a series of very important books already published in 1980s or perhaps written in those years. And one of them is, well, for anybody who is working on Ottoman Armenians, is the book of Hagop Barsumyan, The Amira Class of Armenians. That is a book that we should all have in our libraries, definitely. And I learned a lot from Barsumyan, and I continue to do so as well. And of course, Vartan Artinyan and the book on Armenian Constitution. This one is a Turkish translation of Artinyan, and it has the original text of Armenian Nizamname, the constitution. So therefore, it is a very important book as well. And Arshak Alboyajian, of course, I mean, he wrote 500 pages on Armenian constitution, published in 1910 in one of the yearbooks of Armenian Hospital. So those books, I mean, those are the books that I consulted a lot by, especially while writing the first chapter of this book. And you know, of course, there are a lot of sources, primary and secondary sources. When it comes to primary sources, we have the publications of the Armenian administration, Armenian Patriarchate, which means we have memoranda, we have reports, we have proceedings of Armenian National Assembly, and those documents are giving us a very good picture of what was happening in the mid-19th century. And of course, yearbooks like the one of Armenian Hospital is a very important one. And then we had, I mean, we forget that Armenians have a very long tradition of publishing newspapers. And the first newspaper, the official newspaper too, Takvim Vekai, was also published in Armenian and later in Armeno-Turkish. So from 1840s onwards, we have Armenian periodicals, both in Armenian and in Armeno-Turkish. And then we have, of course, Ormanyan, Askabadum, and other secondary sources as well. Regarding the primary source material, I mean, it's more or less there's a consensus that whatever you're researching on Ottoman Armenians, you should be looking into the Ottoman archives. Of course, you should look into the Ottoman archives, but the existence of Patriarchate archive is a very important source, primary source, with petitions, personal petitions, with collective petitions, and interrogation documents. I can perhaps show you some of the materials and share my screen so that you can also see these samples. Just a second. So. So here, I mean, these are the places where I worked: Istanbul Kitaplığı, Nubarian Library, Boston, of course, the Library of Nasser, and University of Michigan Dearborn's Research Center, Ottoman Archives, National Library of Armenia. In Venice, of course, the Mekhitarist Congregation's library is a very rich one, and Madena Taran, of course, Research Institute of Ancient Manuscripts in Armenia. So yes, these are some of those periodicals that I was talking. We have periodicals from the provinces like Artsvik Darono, or we have newspapers like Zamana Kantes, Hayrenanever, in which we have lots of materials from the provinces published in Istanbul. Or we have like Gilikya, Masis, and then Ceride-i Şarkiye, Manzume-i Efkar in Armeno-Turkish as well. So this is the Nizamname text, the constitution in Armenian, and in Turkish, Nizamname-i Milleti Ermenian. And yeah, this is Artvik Darono from 1863 from the provinces, and Karakin Sırvanstyan, who was publishing this Artvik Darono, and together with Hrimian. Okay, so coming back to that question, how did those archives of the Armenian Patriarchate came to Paris? And this is something that Zavender Yerian, the patriarch of the period 1913 to 1922, when he had to leave Istanbul in 1922 December, incognito. Before leaving, he sent trunks of archival documents to Grigoris Balakyan in Manchester, who was the prelate of Manchester at that time. And later, Balakyan sent those archives to Marseille, and from Marseille, these documents came to Paris. So this is how we have the Patriarchate archive in Paris today. So I mean, this book is arguing that if you are working on Ottoman Armenians, you have also variety of other sources, primary sources, to combine with Ottoman archives. I mean, definitively you should be looking into Ottoman archives, but then you know what you're looking for, because reading and working with the archives of the oppressed, of the annihilated, in the case of Armenians, is telling so many other facets of life than looking into the archives of the sovereign. I mean, it is a different methodology. You follow what the archives of the annihilated, of the oppressed is telling you, and then you check that with the archive of the sovereign, and you definitely find that they are, they have the same information, but formulated in a different way. So it is a very enriching process. And I think this should be the kind of history writing that we should be practicing in the 21st century, and questioning the archive of the sovereign, and to work with those who were not sovereign, and in the cases of Armenians, who were basically annihilated.
Thank you, Talin. So in this book is about Ottoman Armenians in the provinces. What made you put the provincial Armenians at the center of this book?
Okay. So when I first started to work with these archives, there must have, I should have done a choice. There was the moment to decide. So you can choose one big file, let's say Sepastia, Sivas, in which you have hundreds of documents, and you can work on the file of Sepastia. and you write a book on the 19th century Sepastia in the Ottoman Empire, and Armenians, Turks, and whoever was living in Sivas. So what I did, the choice I did, was to look into, first and foremost, the smallest places, like villages, because it was interesting to me. I was interested. I mean, I didn't know those names of the villages, and I was curious, basically, where are these villages? Why wouldn't we know about these villages? And were they Armenian villages? I mean, like places like Gövceköy, places like Belen, Beylan, those places, I was surprised. So I wanted to learn. Basically, this was my motivation. But then I realized the more I was looking into the archival material of the smaller places, the better I was understanding what was happening in the provinces. Because if you write the history of Tanzimat from Istanbul, you have a complete different picture, as opposed to writing a history of Tanzimat from the smallest villages, smallest and most remote villages in the provinces. And after a while, I realized that that is the real and day-to-day picture that we find in these smallest places. So there are more than 40 localities in this book. There are these small villages and provincial centers, and also Istanbul. And Crete is also in it because Crete was part of under the jurisdiction of Patriarchate of Istanbul. So this was a choice which didn't make my work easier, but it definitely made my work much more interesting, first and foremost to me, and it revealed a general picture of Tanzimat in the provinces from the very west to the very east. And I think it contributed a lot to the understanding of a Tanzimat from a completely different perspective, and the perspective of those who are not anymore there.
Thank you, Talin. Maybe we can move to the chapters now and explore them more in detail. My question about the first chapter would be about your argument on centralization. I think that one of the most important arguments in this book is about this parallel stories of centralization, because you state that the centralization of the Ottoman state led to the centralization of the Armenian church, Armenian administration. So can you talk a little bit about this parallel stories, please?
Okay, well, in the Ottoman historiography, we have a narrative in which Tanzimat is narrated as a centralization, as the most important thing, as a centralization of Ottoman state. We hardly ever hear anything about the other groups. So other groups, when they are mentioned, they had their own administrations, they had their own customary law, as if they were living in a kind of vacuum and had no interaction whatsoever. So Ottoman state was centralizing, and Armenians were living according to their own law. This is more or less how it is described or depicted. However, if we look at this process of centralization, Ottoman state as the centralization of the sovereign, and the process that led to Armenian Nizamname, the constitution, as a subordinated centralization, then we have basically two processes of centralization. The one is the centralizing empire, and the other is a subordinated one, the Armenian administration, the Armenian Patriarchate, becoming the center and the point of reference for all Ottoman Armenians. We knew that the Armenian Patriarchate did not have that central role before the 19th century, but we didn't know how that centralization process worked, because the ideal picture with the constitution, with the Nizamname, was to have exact same mechanisms of administration in all Ottoman provinces. And we never knew how far this was applied. And in these documents, we see that that process. So we can trace the centralization process of Armenian administration. But on the other hand, this should not mean that Armenians were autonomous. They had their Nizamname, so they were doing everything according to that. I mean, that is a over-idealized picture of things, because Ottoman administration was intervening arbitrarily, halting, stopping the functioning of the Nizamname, and Armenians had to find ways to tackle their issues and make changes in their administration. So Nizamname was a very important constitution, was a very important text of administration. But Armenians continued to create other legislative texts and executive texts in order to administer themselves. In some cases, they were supporting the Nizamname. In some cases, they were basically not in accordance with Nizamname, but they had to find ways to continue their administration. And of course, by the same token, the centralization of the Patriarchate in Istanbul meant that the bigger monasteries, like the one in Garabet in Mush, or the Catholicosate in Sis, you had gray zones. Now, who is going to be responsible for those places around Sis? What happens to the Catholicosate of Sis when Istanbul is centralizing its power? What would that mean for Sis and for Cilician regions? So these were the gray zones in which Ottoman administration was perfectly governing the Armenians by creating rivalries between them, by saying that Istanbul is the center, but Sis Catholicosate continues to exist. And those kind of double standards and prioritizations, and or not willing to obeying the rules of the Armenian Patriarchate in Istanbul were present all throughout the 19th century. So the first chapter is showing all these, along with the discussions, and of course, Hrimian Hayrik's position, being elected as a patriarch from the provinces, and wanting to create a new assembly for the provinces, because he was seeing, as a patriarch coming from the provinces, he was seeing the problem. He knew the problems of the provinces, and he knew that those problems could not be solved by a single national assembly sitting in Istanbul. So his suggestion was to create a special commission or assembly for the provinces in order to discuss and find solutions only to the problems of the provinces. And of course, this wasn't I mean, Istanbul was not interested in this, and Ottoman administration was not interested in solving any of those problems of the provinces. So after 4 years, he had to resign, and his resignation speech, if you read his resignation speech, along with all those documents published by the Armenian administration itself, you will see how each point of trouble that he was pointing out could be seen later in the years to come in those administrative texts and proceedings. So I think we all appreciate Hrimian as a political leader, and he was, of course, later on a Catholicos of all Armenians in Etchmiadzin. But what we know very little compared to his popularity, what he meant, what kind of a leader he was in the 19th century.
Thank you for this detailed description, Talin. Actually, I have a question about gender from your book. You also state that you have read numerous petitions for this book, and these petitions are also mostly written by women from the provinces. And these women were in the most disadvantaged position. They were mostly single women with children without any male guardians in the household. And they were left outside the historical discourse, obviously. And you also share it in your book. The reason there were so many single women left all by themselves in the provinces was because men couldn't run the household financially, because they couldn't pay the high taxes, and they first to become migrant workers, bantucht in Armenian, and households without male guardians were under threat, which involves being exposed to rape, violence, abductions. Can you say more about the struggle of Armenian women in the provinces? And can you talk about also how reading these petitions helped you visualize the struggle of women in the provinces? Because I strongly believe that by making their voices, their silence voices, which were left on a piece of paper, and their voices and their cries visible, you somehow belatedly transformed them into historical agents. So I would like to hear about this process of bringing them somehow to the present and how it worked for you.
Thank you. So, well, the very first document ever I read and I published on was a document on incest, adultery, and abortion. I mean, it's not very common for an Ottomanist to go and do a research in the Ottoman archives and find one document in which you have all three together. And it's a very heavy case, of course. I had to work on it for years. I started with one article in 2017, and I think the last one is 2021. And that one document stayed with me for years. And probably if I read it today, I would see another point in that article. But it was such a powerful article. A woman being raped or had a sexual relation with her uncle, and being pregnant from him, and the case was in Akşehir, today Konya, near Konya. So Armenian administration couldn't solve the issue, so they sent a petition a collective petition to Istanbul to find a solution to their problem, because the Muslim population of Akşehir was involved too, because she got her abortion by a Muslim woman. So there you understand the limits of these entitlements. So where we read very easily, Armenians had their customary law and they were following their own customary law. Accordingly, they were solving their own family law issues. This doesn't work like that. I mean, at this very moment when a power holder or a Muslim or somebody from another faith was involved, Armenian administration was not always incapable, of applying its own laws and regulations. So that was something that I first came across with the first that document, and then I saw that there were interrogation documents. I mean, we never knew that there were interrogation documents. We knew that there were processes of there's a juridical council, so there must be a process of how to try a case. But I've never known, and I've never seen in the literature that there were documents of interrogations, which I came across in the Armenia Patriarchate's archive from Çarşamba. And in Çarşamba, during this interrogation, you could see how powerful these women were. And yes, they had no male guardian, and no male guardian means no father, no husband. Means that you're open to any kind of threat, which includes, as you said, rape, kidnapping, and all kinds of threats, basically. And they were trying to find a way in order to have a male guardian, whether it is within the ecclesiastical law or not. They had to act and they had to do something, and they were, according to the Armenian administration's laws and regulations, it wasn't legal, and they should have been punished. But on the other hand, they had no other choice. So, for instance, another woman from Güldane, from Efkere in 1860s, what she says is very striking. If you, and she means the patriarch, if you, patriarch, order to separate me from Hacı Sarkis, my blood and my sins be on your head. So she was left alone in the provinces, just like many other Armenian women, because of the Bantucht situation, which was there because of, on the one hand, unpayable taxes, and on the other hand, the forced labor, angarya, starting from the 1840s, when Armenian male, well, at least this is what we know from the documents. Probably we have also angarya before, but the earliest forced labor document I've seen was 1848. So those men who couldn't work at their own work and couldn't earn that money and had to work somewhere else, hundreds of kilometers away, for building a road, for building a castle, for building a police station, whatever, without being paid, and had to pay high and double and triple taxes. At the mid 19th century, it was not anymore possible to, sustainable to live for men in the provinces. So what they were doing was that they were leaving to Istanbul and to bigger cities, and sometimes they never sent money back, and they never kept their connection by writing letters or so. So what happens is that in 1860s, in the provinces, we have Armenian villages in which only women, children, and elderly people are living, and there's no money. So under these conditions, these women without male guardian, if they had a chance to get remarried or without a divorce, they would do so. And they were writing this in form of petition to let the patriarchate know that they have done this and they're not going to be penalized for this. And I think those petitions and interrogation documents are very empowering. Also the one from Konya Akşehir with the incest, abortion, and adultery, those documents are showing how powerful these women were. And in Ottoman historiography, we have those discussions that the women's petitions should be read as showing their agency, and showing how they knew how to deal with the legal structures, institutions, etc. But of course, we had no idea how that was for Armenian women in the provinces. And I think from that perspective, the archives of the Patriarchate reveals a lot to us.
I have a question. In the second chapter of your book, you say the following: province was not only a spatial and administrative concept, but more important one, referring to a certain set of methods of governance, infused by the politics of temporality and territoriality. Can you talk a bit more about how you view and discuss temporality in your book as part of the governance strategies in the provinces? And how are the Armenians in the provinces governed territorially and temporally by the center?
Okay, so Istanbul was the center, and Istanbul was the place of privileges of all kinds. It had its own temporal regime and also territorial regime. So who was, privileged to live there, and under what conditions? That was a world for itself. Istanbul was a world for itself. And then there was the rest and the provinces. And the provinces had their own temporality and their own territoriality. And in the mid-19th century, definitively something, if there's something which has changed continuously almost, is the territoriality of the provinces. And it started, I mean, the mainstream historiography claims that it starts with 1864-71 Vilayet Nizamnamesi, the provincial reform. However, I mean, what I see is that it starts with 1840s, when in the eastern provinces, the Nestorians are massacred, and then new structures, new regulations, and a new vilayet afterwards followed, the new province followed and established, and we see how masterfully the borders of this vilayet, the vilayet of Kurdistan, was being changed constantly, and that was a kind of rehearsal for the provincial reform to come in 1860s. In 1860s, while we had in 63 the Nizamname, which was ratified by the Ottoman state, and at the very same time, we have the provincial reforms coming up. So, and there are so many petitions being written from the provinces to Istanbul saying that we were used to connected, or we were used to be under the sovereignty we were legislatively under the administration of Sivas, and now we are under Ünye. And it's impossible to go to Ünye because there are çetes on the way, there are gangs on the way which are attacking us. So in another place in Cilician region, we see that Armenians in the remote villages are being exiled, and you know, there's no conflict whatsoever. They're peacefully living villagers on top of a mountain, all of a sudden had to be exiled from their village to Payas. And then if you follow their cases up in the Ottoman archives, you see that there are various orders which were ordering to exile them from Belen to Payas, from Payas to Belen. I mean, it continues until the 20th century. So this means that the provincial reforms had direct impact on the demography of the regions. And this was not in the 1880s. This was not in the Hamidian era. This was way before it. And it was parallel to the ratification of the Nizamname, almost. So I think, and of course, from the perspective of the Armenian peasants or Armenians of the provinces who were continuously petitioning the center, Istanbul, the Patriarchate, the Ottoman administration, the local Ottoman power holders, their temporality, I mean, the temporal governance here was that the sovereign just let these people wait. So they their problems got more complicated. Others, the local power holders involved in their issues, and it got, the conflict involved many other people as opposed to 10 years ago. But those were no problems for the center. The more complicated the problem was getting, the longer was, the reaction was, or perhaps no reaction was coming at all from the center. So that was the temporal governance of the center to the provinces, that they're going to petition, and then one day Ottoman administration would say, well, we don't want any more these kind of petitions, because this was also an issue. They were saying, okay, these are petitions of political sort, and we do not accept any more political petitions. So there was an arbitrating power what kind of petitions can be submitted, when they could be submitted, and whether or not there will be any answer given from the provinces to from the center to the provinces. So I think this much I could say about temporality and territoriality.
Thank you. Can we move to chapter 3, because we're going chapter by chapter, I think. The title of your third chapter is Armenian-Rum Relations. What do you think the study of relations between millets can open up about Ottoman history? And what kind of studies have been done before? And what does this chapter offer us in this sense?
Well, I mean, that chapter came to being like the other chapters because of a very simple reason. I've seen so many documents. Perhaps I can also share again my screen and show some of those documents on the relations of Greeks and Armenians. Okay, this is the photograph of Patriarch Mugdish-Khalimian. And for instance, this one, this is from Crete. And Cretan Metropolitan, the Metropolitan of Heraklion, is writing on behalf of the Armenians of Crete to the Armenian Patriarchate. This is one of those documents. We have the Greek original, and then we have the Armenian translation, and we witness a case in which the Metropolitan of Heraklion is helping the Armenian community in Crete with their problems. And this is, of course, I mean, Crete is a special place in which we have the Cretan revolts against the Ottomans. So here it is, we see that both groups are in solidarity. The same we see in the situation in Erzurum, where Greek community expressed their gratitude to the Armenian prelate of Erzurum, because he was attending their problems as well. So this shows that in the places where the population, the majority of the population, has a problem with the sovereign one, the others could have a relation in solidarity. However, in many other places like Antalya, the western parts, Bandırma, and other parts of the empire, where there are considerable both Armenian and Greek population, we see the power clashes between them. So I think studying the relationships between the groups makes it a real history. I mean, imagining that groups are living in a vacuum and they are separated and they have nothing to do with each other is just not true. And the more we study their interactions, the more we understand where the limits are. So where are the limits of Armenian administration? Where are the limits of the Greek administrations? And how is Ottoman administration involved? And then we understand what governance means. So I think looking at these various layers, it shows also how Ottoman societal fabric was working.
Let's move on to the last question, Talin. And then we can start taking questions from our participants. So regarding the fourth chapter, I would like to pose a question that I believe will be particularly relevant to the Armenians of Istanbul. For me, one of the most interesting parts of the book was the section in this last chapter where you discuss the function of the patriarchate as a dungeon. The Church of Sırp in Narlıkapı as a sort of prison, and also the history of Sırp Hospital. You also refer there to Yesayan's book, Gardens of Siliktar. Can you please provide some information about the history of these institutions?
Okay, Armenian Hospital, which was built in 1830s. Of course, before than that, we had the Greek hospital by the mid 18th century, I guess. It was founded, and it's, you know, that physically they are next to each other. So Armenian Hospital is one of the most important institutions of Armenian administration also today, along with the Patriarchate. And it was in Narlıkapı, Narlıkapı church had a prison, and it is said that the prisoners were making so much noise during the Sunday Mass that the amiras, the power holders of the community, said, okay, this cannot continue like this. Let's, you know, seclude these people, put these people away somewhere where we wouldn't hear their voices, of course. And that was the way Armenian Hospital was founded. And at the very beginning, it had many sections, and also a section for women. And while reading the documents, I came across with that concept of sending people from Zaptiye, from the police station, from Zaptiye to hospital. And then I understood that basically hospital was being used as a prison for those of Armenian criminals as well. And there was a section for, they're calling it absent-minded, and then there was a section for for women, and a section for clearly criminals. And it was a later development that people came to Armenian hospital to be cured. So yeah, this is one of those many functions that Armenian hospital had, as the function of imprisonment.
Hey, I think we've been talking for almost an hour now. Maybe we can turn to our audience. There are, I see 28 attendees listening to us, maybe also some on YouTube. If you have any questions, we have a question and answer section down below the Zoom square. You can put your questions here. Somebody asked about our email address. I think at the beginning I said parrhesiacollective@gmail.com, but it should be parrhesiameetings@gmail.com. I'm just correcting it now.
Yeah, both.
Both are, I think, both are functional, right? And on social media, we also go with as Parrhesia Meetings on Instagram, right? At least I can say that. And let's wait for a minute or two and breathe. You've been talking a lot, Talin. Thank you for this wonderful and very fluent sharing of the material. It's fascinating, really, to read about all the detailed information about administrative information, the petitions, stories about the buildings, as Cecile asked, and Armenian-Rum relations. It's a very rich book. I'm not sure if any of the participants had a chance to read the book. That's also a question for me. If not, maybe you can just ask from what you heard. Maybe until the questions come, there was a map on your PowerPoint
presentation. Yeah.
Yes, maybe you can talk about that, Talin. Why not? Until people get prepared for the questions.
So these are also, I can show the material a little bit
Sure.
during that time. So this is one of the petitions, for instance, there's a meters long one petition. So you can imagine how there was a burning issue there that people wrote that long petitions. So finding a paper is not easy always. And so writing a petition is not always, a random thing. Of course, there were practices in which that was also said that, people would put their stems and just send anything to Istanbul. But then there were real issues, such as this one. This is from Beylan and Çorkmaz one, the case that I explained, from Beylan to Payas, from Payas to Beylan, 1860s, after the provincial reforms. And this is the map of Muş, drawn by Armenians. And why am I showing this map? In the middle, or you see the river. Well, the river is here. This is the river. And very recently, we had in one of our masterclass discussions a text that we were discussing from US. I think it was a map of indigenous people drawn of Mississippi. And I remembered this map, but I couldn't find it at that time to show to the students. But now that I found it again and realized how similar these maps were drawn, because indigenous people, they map their region always with the river, because water is life, and their fields and agricultural activities, etc., they are incorporated in their maps. Whereas we know that the maps of the sovereign, they always talk about, or they always want to govern, and they always want to depict the area according to administration. So I think this is one of those indigenous maps in which water, the means of life, and their occupation is reflected. I wanted to show this map. Yes. And this is again another document from the archives. Of course, archives are multilingual, and you have documents in Ottoman Turkish, meaning Turkish written in Perso-Arabic script, and then you have lots of material in Armenian, and then you have Armeno-Turkish. I mean, this is also an interesting observation, because wherever you have big monasteries, you don't have any Armeno-Turkish petitions. You have very eloquent and very nicely written Armenian petitions. Places like Kars, Artvin, Erzurum, you can hardly see any Armeno-Turkish petition from these places, whereas from Cilician regions, from Sivas, from other places, from remote places, mostly from the small and remote places, you have more Armeno-Turkish, Armenian letters, Turkish written in Armenian letters, and we have of course Greek, as I showed, and also one or some Greco-Turkish documents. So this is us visiting Nubaryan Library last winter in Paris. Yes.
Thank you. The map you shared was really very interesting. Thank you. This is also something we discuss in our Kavar literature readings, the connection to the land. For those who want to attend, I'm just saying. Okay. There are 3 questions, Talin. from an anonymous attendee. I'm not sure if it's the same person. 3 questions, actually, so far. I'm asking the first one to you now. Thank you so much for the talk today. My question is, have you encountered the novel Akabi Hikayesi at all? And does this novel reveal anything about the constitutional period that corresponds with your research?
Yes, of course. Akabi Hikayesi studied a lot. I mean, there are many articles on that. I mean, our attendee can read the most recent ones. I mean, I think for 20 years now that the Akabi Hikayesi is being studied. So yes, that is the Armeno-Turkish novel, and yeah, you can read that, and it is of course about that period. But it's a literary source that I did not consult in this study.
Okay, by I guess the same attendee, anonymous again. Second question is, how did language play a role in the validity of petitions and documents? Was language connected to that statement of voiding political documents?
Well, I mean, language, of course, was very important, and there were in the proceedings of Armenian National Assembly and in the publications of Armenian administration, sometimes certain orders saying that how the language should look like in the petitions. I mean, they should be very polite and they should be very sophisticated. And of course, Armenians were the ones who were using Turkish language, the Ottoman version of it as well, in its best forms. I mean, you know, on the level of bureaucracy, they had all the you know, language abilities. So yes, it was very important how you were using the language, and yes, and there were several people working at the Patriarchate as, you know, translators, and they were writing, people who are correcting the writings of the petitions and as such.
Thank you. Another question by, again, an anonymous attendee. How does your work relate to more recent books in Armenian history, such as Richard Antaramyan's Brokers of Fate, Brokers of Empire? And do you see your book as revising late Ottoman history? And if so, how do you think it changes our understanding of this period, besides offering Armenian perspectives from various localities through your brilliant archival work?
Well, of course, this is a book which you know, talks to the recently published other books, like the one of Antaramyan. And the thing is that when we are writing Ottoman history or history of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, our first point of reference is mostly Istanbul. Or if not, or else it is the power holders, the prominent people in the provinces. So what I try to do in this book is to involve and engage in discussion with the peasants and women and those disabled ones, those who were in need of social help. So I you know, it turned out to be a history of those who were marginalized and who were left outside of any hierarchical power relations. And I think that is a position to take, because following Benjamin, in order to understand the sovereign, you have to look at the oppressed. And in our case, in the case of Armenians, to look at those of annihilated is revealing a completely different picture of how we should be reading 20th century as well. So without taking into account all those people who were exiled, annihilated, kidnapped in the 20th century, without understanding their way, their history, I think we can only misunderstand what had happened in 1915.
Thank you. And another question by another attendee. Can you talk a bit about your findings on the relations between Muslim ethnic minorities, Kurds and Circassians and Armenians? What does that reveal about the role of the state in fostering inter-ethnic rivalries?
Well, I think our anonymous attendee wants me to talk about all the book. And for this, I would say they should read it, because there is a 50-page chapter, the biggest chapter is that one, on the relations of Armenians, Kurds, Circassians. And I think after 1 hour of presentation now, it will be too long to talk about that.
Okay, yes. Another question is coming from Talin Suciyan. Thank you, Talin, she says, for this interesting talk, and thank you to the collective for these sessions. My question is about the relationship between patriarchate archives as sources of the governed and literature as source material, which is something historians generally stay away from. Wouldn't the work of writers whose material was the life of the provinces, I have in mind Hagop Oshagan, be relevant? And how would they be approached and used?
Of course. I mean, Hagop Oshagan, this was one of our discussions in Parrhesia Collective's Kavar literature reading groups, because Hagop Oshagan's Monatzortats, the remnants, it starts from 1850. So why is that so? While we think of massacres being the background of 1915, why did Oshagan start his novel? It's a novel, right? Literary work, The Remnants. Why did he start from 1850s? Because he too, being from the provinces, knew what was happening in those times. So it makes complete sense, of course. Absolutely.
And one last question from Araksi Karlopyan. How easily accessible are Ottoman archives to Armenians in general? Any restrictions for the general public?
Well, I mean, I think it's not, there's nothing special about Armenians. Anybody who is interested in researching could apply for an for a researcher permission and do the research. And I think the problem there is that you have, countless documents and not very easily understandable bureaucratical orders of these archives to work with. So I was lucky working with the Armenian archives, because I could follow the cases up from the Ottoman archives, and I wasn't doing it the other way around. So it was easier for me to see the problems and look for those problems in and how they were documented in the Ottoman archives. So I mean, anybody who is interested could apply and do research, but the problem is not to have the access, but to make sense out of it.
I think this is all we have as for questions, but I don't know if any of you want to say anything. Cecile, Aras?
Thank you so much for today, Talin.
I thank you. I hope I could give good answers to the questions, and everything was clear and understandable, hopefully. And if not, please do ask.
I mean, obviously there is a very rich material in your book, and we could only cover just a very small part of it, but as an introduction, it was very enriching. Thank you very much for sharing all your sincere thoughts and work with us. And I also want to say before we leave, what's next? What's awaiting you next? How will this book travel? Maybe you can say
Well,
something about that too.
The Turkish translation already started. So Ayşe Günaysu, the translator of my first book into Turkish, is now translating the second book, and I'm very happy that it's going to be also available in Turkish soon. And the book, there will be a book tour in US, and it will start from Harvard and then San Francisco, Fresno, and UCLA. And afterwards, probably in New Jersey and Columbia and Washington, D.C. and UPenn are still in organization. So there will be a number of lectures in US. And I hope this will be an opportunity to meet, for the book to meet a new audience.
I wish you and your book gets lots of great listeners and readers, Talin, with an open heart and mind. And I would like to thank Tamar and Denche again for their support in the background. And Cecile and Araz were with us too. And thank you for all the participants also for your attention and patience. See you next time. You'll be hearing from us through our social media, and we'll be hosting hopefully Mark Nishanyan next month.